Truth Talks. Please, I'm excited about the Truth Talks. They are addressing true fellowship and what it means, what true fellowship and corporate worship looks like according to the Bible.
I will sing to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown.
As y'all know, we're in the book of Judges. And how many of us have had a chance to look at it? Okay, good. How many of us had a chance to study it? Okay, good. Okay, well, tonight my aim is to just give a introductory overview and highlight some things. And we will look at a couple of verses just to kind of hopefully stimulate our hearts to, hey, maybe I need to go back and take a look at this book. But even if you don't get a chance to study it, hopefully, as we have the guide discussion, you'll read it and you'll be familiar with some names and some activities. You don't want to sit here? Yeah, I'll sit it there for you.
Far away from that spot.
So when we come together and the guide discussion is going, it'll be easy for you to pick up and just learn some things. Joshua is a very interesting book. Just to give you a little background, it covers the period after Joshua's death to the dawn of the monarchy.
Judges is the book.
Oh yeah, I keep saying Joshua. He did
You got
such
the
a
J.
good job.
J's, okay.
Oh, it's still on me. But Judges is from the time of the death of Joshua, as we know he was their leader, to the dawn of the monarchy. So we're going to get to see a lot of things in this book that we can kind of say, hey, you know, this is a reoccurring thing in the whole world today, especially a society that thinks that God is far off. You know, if our king is not directly in our house, we can kind of do as we want. And we'll see deliverance from deliverance to deliverance. So this is a time before the kings and a time after the death of Joshua. We'll also see as we have the guide discussion in this book, and I want you to look for these as we talk about them as you study the political and religious turmoil that accompanied Israel while they attempted to occupy the land that Joshua had given to them and gave them lots under his leadership. In the opening of Joshua, we see the general attitude of these people against God. It was just that. It was a general attitude. It was a lackadaisical attitude that they had against God. And also we'll get to see the attitude that the Lord had against his people. You know, it was still love for his people. He never stopped loving them, though they had a general lackadaisical attitude against him. In this book of Joshua, Judges also, if I say Judges, if I say Joshua, just put Judges there. In this book of Judges, we see a constant alternation of humility and hostility and oppression. That's what you're going to see up and down in this book. And it's mainly because of the people, like I say, their general lackadaisical attitude against the Lord. And we'll see that also that leaders are important. You know, i.e., whether it be judges, or whether it be prophets, priests, or whether it be kings. You know, leaders are important throughout our society as it was for them. But we know ultimately God is our leader and God was their leader. And they failed to recognize that I guess since Joshua was gone in their own way that they can go and do as they wanted to because Joshua can't see us anymore and whatever the case may be. And God is a distant God. And we got to remember in these lands sometime, like I said, they still had turmoil. They was in a hostile place with the people. With the loss of love and fidelity to the Lord, which is very important. The loss of fidelity and love for the Lord, we see the bond of the unity which formed the tribes, because that's what formed the tribes together into one congregation. The bond with Jehovah was broken. The tribes was broken apart from each other, and the different tribes began to go their own separate ways. They start to think different. It's like if I had a bowl of marbles here and I took the bowl and somehow the bowl would be in this representation as God, and he would keep the bond of unity of the tribes together. If the bowl is removed and the marbles fall and just go their own way. That's the way attitude was, when Joshua died. Not only Joshua died, but all those who was doing that time with Joshua died. And you got to think, as the stories are being told, how they crossed over to the city of Palms or Jericho and how they left out of Egypt. None of those people was experiencing that. The stories was being told. So this main motivation to obey God, all that generation was gone. Just a hint for us. This is why it's important that we continue to tell the story here at Firm Foundation Fellowship and as far as our families as we know it. The different tribes begin to separate, go their own way, and tragically, the Israelites even fought among themselves. A nation without God, that's what we would do. We would fight against ourselves. Ephraim was ravaged by Manasseh, and Benjamin was almost annihilated by other tribes. This is something that Joshua didn't allow. They might have conquered other countries, but while Joshua was around, he kept unity. Between the days of Joshua and Samuel, Israel plummeted into a moral, spiritual disaster. Over and over, the pattern of sin followed by oppression, it was repeated over and over. Occasionally, God raised up a Deborah or a Samson or a Gideon to turn the people back to himself. As you see on the board here, I have a total of 13 names. There are 12 tribes mentioned, or rather 13, or 12 judges mentioned, or rather with 13 with Deborah. We know she worked with a man by the name of Barak. I'll give you time to write these names down in a minute. We're going to talk about them. But there are only 8 that are described in the Bible as actually being judges of Israel. Now, when I use the name judges, they weren't judges like our judges in our municipal courts today. These are actually the names of deliverers. They might have sat at the gate and they might have made decisions through the Urim and the Thummim that we talked about before. But it was only 8 that the Bible really kind of hones in on, but there was a total of 13. The ones you see on the right over here were judges as well. However, these are not the ones that God had called to be judges. And I will let you know where they fell in here. But after there was a time of the period with no judges, they wanted a leader. And these men stepped up or were appointed to be judges in between some of these here. Let's talk about it. Othniel, he was the first judge. Who was he? He was Caleb's younger brother. Okay. His name means powerful. Powerful one. A Lion of God. He delivered the people from Mesopotamia. And then the second name we have here was Ehud. I think that's how you pronounce that. Ehud. Strong on union. This was the judge that was the left-handed man. He bound his sword on his right side, and it was a double-edged sword, but he was left-handed. I want to take a look at that right quick, just a quick excerpt. Let's go to Judges 3:15 through 18. And he was good with it. When he used it, he went all the way in. I know I'm giving an overview, so I'm kind of going through it, but if you got something you want to share on each of these judges, please do, because we will go back by chapter at least and go through them. Let's just read 15 through 18, just a little bit about this man. And that's some more interesting stuff here as he used this sword. Usually when a person is right-handed, they carry their weapon on their right side. But this was the thing about this man. I'm reading out of NESB 3:15 through 18. But when the sons of Israel cried to the Lord raised up a deliverer or a judge for them, Ehud, the son of Gera, the Benjamite, a left-handed man, and the son of Israel sent tribute by him to Eglon, the king of Moab. Ehud made himself a sword, which had 2 edges, a cubit in length, and he bound it on his right thigh under his cloak. He presented the tribute to the Eglon, king of Moab. Now, Eglon was a very fat man. Anybody heard the story before? Yeah, very fat man. I mean, you know, you shoot a fat man, you cut a fat man, it's gonna take some time for that fat man to bleed out and die. It came about when he had finished presenting the tribute that he sent away the people who had cared about the tribute. But he himself turned back from the idols which were at Gilgad and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he said, keep silence. And all who attended him left. In other words, since it was a secret message, he sent the people out. So there was nobody in there but these 2 people. When everybody went out, he killed the man. Okay, and then he left the room. Okay, so we will get into him even more. So he was the second king and that delivered them from the Moabites. Then we have Samgar. His name means cupbearer or surprise stranger. All these men did something unique. I'd only cover a few of them. This man right here, he fought with an ox goad. Anybody don't know what an ox goad is? An ox goad is, if you it's got a point on it.
Mhm.
Paul talks about it's hard to kick against the pricks or hard to kick against the
Get through
gold.
it.
The gold,
Yeah.
okay, it's got a point on it. So if you want somebody to move, you know, you're poking with that, and that's what he fought with. Okay, let's read about it in Judges 3:31. Just one verse. Let's see how he was able to use this against the Philistines. Somebody want to read 3:31?
Now, after he came, Shamgar,
Samgar.
the son of Anar, who struck and killed 600 Palestinians with an ox goad,
Yeah.
and he also saved Israel.
Got it? That's what the judges did. They fought for Israel. And with this one weapon in this man's hand, he fought a war. We may be or not have genius, brilliant gifts, or good at speech or songs like myself, but in the hands of Christ, we can do mighty things. And so he did with this tool that he had. Then we have Deborah and Barak. She has a unique name. Anybody know what her name means?
Who, Deborah?
Yeah,
Mm.
it means
Not
bee.
really.
Her name means bee.
Sting, like a bee.
There you go.
She
She stands out among the most wisest women of the Old Testament. We know we have Mary, we have Martha, but she is listed as most wisest woman in the Old Testament. Like the bee, as you said, she has a fatal sting against her enemy. It has been said among all the animal kingdoms that she ranks among the highest of all intelligence. Bees are very intelligent.
Mm.
We need them. Barak needed her. I would hope that just like she inspired, because that's just what she did. She inspired bravery in Barak as he consulted her to go with him. And you got a question?
I was saying, and you mentioned her name was Bee. You know, you gave the analogy of the hive, the intelligence of Deborah. And it's very unique that you brought up that particular insect, is because her name, even her name symbolizes the queen of the hive. A lot of people think that the queen of the hive is like a very weak bee. She's pretty strong. Yet she doesn't, she rules, but she doesn't. Same way that Deborah, when you look at me, and I know we'll get into it in the story, how she said, even though I'm powerful, it is not meant for me to lead. Go out amongst the people. The same way, the queen bee can lead the hive, but if she does, the hive falls in. And at that time, that was, I just thought about this.
And very good. And remember, I had said before, names mean something.
Mhm.
People just didn't flippantly name their people. Of course, names during this time, we know that they was given by the Lord, because we'll learn when we get to the book of Isaiah that Cyrus' name was mentioned 150 years before he was even born. And so, however, whenever his parents named him, we knew that the Lord moved their heart. And they probably didn't even know about the prophecy at the time, but he was definitely the man who, you know, who fulfilled that prophecy. So as we see these names, we don't want to look at them as just flippant. Oh, she's just a woman that came by. She actually lived her name, especially in the war that they fought against the Canaanites. Now, I got her listed with Barak because of the team effort that they did in the war. And notice her name is mentioned first, even though he was actually the judge. It's because of her uniqueness, which we'll get into when we get into the book of Judges. So she will also be listed as, you know, she was a prophetess.
Yeah, yeah, it's a prophet.
She'll be also be listed as a judge. I want to say something about this too, since we right here, because we're here. You know what I'm going to talk about, right? When we talk about elders in the church, this has nothing to do with the church. This has all to do with judges. Okay, so we can't compare and say since she was a judge or she was a prophetess, that now we can have women as elders or pastors or bishops in the church. I just want to dispel that right quick before we even get over that far in the scripture, because when we get to the book of Timothy, we're going to be talking about qualifications for an elder. And this name seems to come up a lot of times when we get to that area. Okay? Go ahead.
She admitted herself. She told him, you have to be the head.
Right. And yeah, it was under his leadership. But she was the wise one.
If you have your own agenda out, like a lot of these people do, they really, a lot of people make up their mind about what they want to do, and then they go to scriptures to try to back up what they've made up in their mind versus making up their mind to agree with what God said in the scriptures. If they use Deborah as an example, you see her humility,
Right.
even though God put her in that place. And it has nothing to do with, it's how people go to justify women pastors. It has nothing to do with that at all.
And this is why I'm glad that we're going through the scriptures like this, because it's keeping the story where the story is supposed to be. If it's applicable to the church, then we can do that. Or if we can see some transparency with like in Judges, the disobedience of nations, you know, how God sees everything and how God used the enemy as a switch to the people that he loved. We always talk about chastening of the church. So we see a lot of switches here, you know, just from different branches, different countries that come against them. So this is why it's good that as we're teaching the Old Testament here, we teach it as it is. And then if we want to make resemblance to, now let's do that, but let's first set it where it is. And then we can move forward with, okay, resemblance things can be happening today. Yes.
Well, see, and that's what, like you said, that's important, because understanding Deborah, then they can't debate with you if you show them in the scriptures, look, this is what she said, this is where she belongs here in the process. But also Barak himself, the reason you got him teamed up is because it needed to be teamed up, because his name is what? Lightning, right? It means lightning or lightning flash.
Lightning or thunder.
Or thunder. So you got bee sting and light.
Well, he did go to it though. He did go. If you go with me, I go. So okay.
Needed it.
Yeah, he needed it. Okay. Any more? Okay, then we have Gideon.
Gideon Bible.
Okay. He that bruises, a great warrior. And he also delivered them from the Midianites. Can anybody tell me just something about Gideon? Anything? Tell me about the water they drinking or something, how they drink it, how they.
Oh, you
choose
talking
to
about, oh.
drink. Did anybody tell me something about getting good?
Go ahead.
I say, every time I think about Gideon, I always think about brushing my teeth. And I know it's very simple, minded wise, because when I didn't pay attention to it, I really started studying the Bible. When I brush my teeth, I'm always looking up. The same way that God told him to choose his men. Anyone who had their head down and lapped up water like a dog, don't take them with you.
Yeah, and before you go, and everybody here, the words, the Gideon feud. But everybody know why they call it the Gideon feud. And we're gonna learn about that as we go through it, why they call it the Gideon feud, because there was more wanted to go or more ready to go. But God said, no, this is how you're gonna choose your man.
Well, that's what I was gonna say right there, is that he had a bunch of men, a whole lot of men he was carrying there to go against that a number of an army that they had to go up against. But God said, I'll be leading, so this is what we need to do.
Yes, and what we're seeing that is numbers are not always powerful,
Right.
especially when God is with you. The main issue is God with you. That's the main story. I think Omar was teaching on something, maybe Peter, when he's saying, if you take all these men, it might have been you, you're going to say you did it by your strength. Yeah, and all the enemies are going to see that you had a lot of men. That's how you won.
Right.
So I'm going to take some of your manpower and I'm going to let you go in with a few so they can know that the Lord is with you. I'm going to fight this battle. And every time he says, I'm going before you, we're going to find out through Deborah's song in the 5th chapter of this book. You can note it down. She have a song that she sang like Moses' song when the war was over. And the song represents how they won the war. Because we know that chariots don't work in the hills. And God had a way of moving them down in the valley with chariots have an advantage. And they were supposed to go in and fight. And just go back and read that song if you can decipher to see exactly what she's saying. If you read the story before, you get it. But when God had called them down out of the hills, now they're down there with their chariots, and they have got the advantage over Deborah, and Barak. But the Lord intervened with some bad weather. And chariots and horses don't work good in bad weather.
Not mud.
And they begin to
Bog
slaughter
down.
themselves.
Yeah. Also, when we smile about Gideon, is that when we talk about the selection of the people, is that guess what? They did, and if I understand right, Gideon's men that he chosen did basically what they did at Jericho. They didn't lift a sword to go in there.
Right.
Because the God made the ones there wake up and be fighting amongst themselves.
Right.
So,
And he caused confusion just like he did when they came out of Egypt.
right.
And they couldn't get to the Israelites before they crossed over until God got ready for them
Right.
to. He caused confusion by the enormous amount of thunder and fire. Then we have Japhet. He do open or set free. I want to read something about him. He delivered from the Ammonites. Judges 11:29-35. Now, I want to ask you a question. Let me ask my preachers here. If you make an oath to the Lord, would you hold to it?
Yeah.
You would, no matter what, right?
Yeah.
All right, then. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. Would you? No matter what it was, right? Okay. Well,
It's better than not making those. Think about what you.
well, I mean, if you want the Lord to be with you, sometimes, you're serious about that and you're,
You said
Make an oath.
11:25, right?
yeah, 11:20, chapter 11, verse 29 through 35.
Okay. I know you want to read it with your glasses. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're gonna let you read it. Since you said if you make a vow to the Lord, you will. Have anybody read this story yet? When I read it, I sit back in my chair.
Okay, you ready?
It's one of my wife didn't ask me what was wrong. I said, whoa,
You ready?
this gentleman here wanted to win the war. He made a vow to the Lord. The war was over. And he was more torn after the war before he was
I would have been.
before. 29 through 35. Y'all listen to this right quick. Just listen at it.
Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead, and Manassas. Then he passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah to Gilead, he went on to the son of Ammon. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed hand over to me the sons of Ammon. Oh, I've been through this one.
Just the best way you can. Go ahead.
No,
I just wanna get the gist of the story.
I know what it says. Then whatever comes out of the store of my house to meet me when I return safely from the sons of Ammon, it shall be yours, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering.
Now, I don't know if he had any cats or dogs. I don't know what he was expecting, but
Mhm.
go ahead.
So Jephthah crossed over to the sons of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord handed them over to him. He inflicted a very great defeat on them from Ari to enter. Man, he loved these words.
What
Verse
verse?
33. Menais,
Oh, yeah, verse 33.
Menais,
Ninth, yeah.
Menais. 20 cities, and as far as Abba Karamai. So the sons of Ammon were subdued before the sons of Israel. But Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah, and behold, his daughter was coming out to meet him with tambourines and with dancing.
She was happy. My father's back home.
And
Not knowing the oath he made.
she was his one and only child. Besides her, he had no sons or daughters.
Mm.
So when he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, "Oh, my daughter,
Mhm.
you have brought me disaster, and you are among those who trouble me, for I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot take it back."
See that? You know, now that's some trusting in the Lord in doing what you said you was going to do. The nation as a whole, they would ask for God to deliver them.
Mhm.
We will obey. And this happened all throughout Israel's journey. We will obey. Just deliver us. You send him a judge, or he send him a king or whatever. As soon as he get him out of the situation, they go right back in. This marriage here represented what a whole nation should have done. You know, he was like Isaac. You know, he only had one son.
But was even great, was even more as you read more of it, is what his daughter did.
Yes,
Is what his daughter did.
he went through with it. Go ahead and read it. What verse you starting at?
36. So she said to him, "My father, you have given your word to the Lord." Listen what she said. You have given your word to the Lord.
Mhm.
Do to me just as you have said, since the Lord has brought you vengeance on your enemies, the sons of Ammon. And she said to her father, "Let this thing be done for me. Allow me 2 months so that I may go to the mountain and weep because of my virginity, and I and my friends." Then he said, "Go." So he let her go for 2 months, and she left with her friends and weep on the mountain because of her virginity. And at the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did to her what he had vowed. And she had no relationship with a man, and it became a custom in Israel.
And so he did sacrifice her. And she believed that her husband, her father was with the Lord. I know a lot of my children probably would have been kicking and fighting. That's between you and God. I ain't got nothing to do with it. So some unique things happens in the book of Judges. And this is just one of the many. And then the last judge we have that the Lord raised up, we all know him as Samson. His name means distinguished, or strong, or son man, S-U-N. Can anybody tell me anything about Samson? Even the cartoon story you hear, that's fine.
He's a
What
Mennonite.
about Samson?
He was Mennonite. Not Mennonite,
What,
but
what was
Nazarene.
what was
He was
his
Nazarene.
unique? What was unique about Samson?
It's strong, his hair.
He was superly naturally endowed.
Mhm.
You know, he thought his strength came from his hair, but his strength actually came from the Lord.
Mm.
He killed the lion. He killed 30 Philistines. That was who he delivered them from. 1,000 men. He broke the strongest bands when they had him chained. Think about this one. He carried off the gates of Gaza. Just carried them off. He pulled down the temple of Dagon. You hear him among the illustrious faith in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 32. I drew the arrows here from the first two judges who was not commissioned by God. They came in between Gideon and
Yeah.
Jephthah, and then the other three came after Jephthah and before Samson. Again, these are not really men that God raised up, but it's just a prelude that they wanted a judge during between these times when there was no judge. And the same way they wanted these judges, we'll see when we get to Samuel, is the same way that they wanted a king. Judges fall directly within the heroic age, a time when divinely provided leaders were called on to save the day by personal exploits. And that's what these judges did. That's why they put them in here, because they're important for what they did personally for the nation. It was an unstable period characterized by tribal migration and a lack of central authority. Right in the immediate area, there was really no authority. When the judges died, there was no immediate authority. And so you will see over and over again in this book, you would hear the people did what was right in their own eyes. That's what happens when a country does not have a leader. Here you'll see people led dangerous yet simple lives in which warlike pursuits here and there alternated with ordinary peacetime activities. The events narrated in Judges cover a period of about 400 years. So you would have maybe 30 years of a judge, then you might have a time period where there was no judge, and you might have 40 years of a judge. They served long times. And so we're talking over a period of approximately about 40 years.
400
Consequently,
years. You said 400 years.
400 years.
Mm.
Consequently, some of the judges overlaps with each other.
Mm.
You know, we have Samson and Jephthah, they overlap. One was over the west of Canaan, and the other was east of Transjordan. So you might have judges at the same time in different areas. The authorship of this book is unknown. In the Talmud, or Jewish Talmud, they would say that Samuel wrote the book. You know, I searched and searched and searched, maybe some of you know, but the author of the book is unknown. What is the purpose of the book? The primary purpose of the book of Judges is to show that Israel's spiritual condition diminished or determined its political and material situation. When the nation turned to God in obedience, God graciously delivered them. When they turned away, God used other nations as a switch. When they disregarded Joshua's warning and worshiped the gods of Canaan, the nation came under control of tyrants and invaders. I always say, if you don't believe in anything, you'll fall for anything. You know, everybody have an innate ability in them that God has created us with to want to worship something. And when you didn't have leaders there immediately, godly leaders there, this is what they did. They fought against themselves, individual homes, worshiped other gods. We're going to see some things that ran rampant here, but also whole nations did what they thought was right in their own eyes. As the book progresses, Israel's plight worsened. Just like today, things gonna wax worse and worse in person's life, in individuals' homes, in cities, and as the world. By the end of the book, the story of sin and all our civil war depicts the nation's desperate need for unity and order. Remember I said earlier, they began to go their separate ways. Not only went their separate ways, but they began to fight against each other. When Joshua was there, they're always together. When the judges was there, they seemingly to all come together. But when these people died off, they began to fight against one another. Again, Judges, this book repeatedly, time and time, repeats that Israel had no king. Let's look at it, the very last verse in this book. You got it also early on in the book. And the implication is that a nation led by a godly king would experience prosperity under the blessings of God. God was their king, but they were disobeying God. And we'll find out about that in Samuel, how God gave them a king, and they had godly kings, and they had kings that wasn't so godly. What does the last verse say in the book?
Good.
In those days, there were no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
They didn't recognize that they had a king. They thought they had no leadership. The book of Judges shows that Israel failed to realize her divine intended goal without a king. They had a divine intended goal from God without a king, and they failed to realize that. They felt that they had to have a human king like a leadership like the rest of the nations. Remember, God wouldn't have had to raise up judges had they been doing what they was doing. The judges was only raised up to stop the oppressors from coming. That's why he raised up the judges. Israel was unable to govern herself according to the Mosaic law, and therefore proved that she needed a king. If you don't recognize the divine order without a king, then you're proving that you need a king. Eventually, Judah emerged as a tribe that produced the Davidic dynasty. I believe that the author and writer in this book intention is to show the advantage of a monarchy rather than an anarchy. The difference is they need a leader. They needed someone in charge, but they needed someone who was led by God, who was godly and knew the divine plan for the nation. Imagine us as a country without a president. Though things may be like they are. Imagine us coming here willy-nilly without God even being involved. The operation that would even go on here in Firm Foundation Fellowship. Even in the smallest entity in Little Old Firm Foundation Fellowship, we need leadership and we need godly leadership. And so we do in a nation like this. What are the theological values of this book that we learn? If you had one doctrine that you can say that depicts this book. I'm talking the activity here going on. We have one doctrine. You say repentance? Okay, because that's what kept happening over and over and over. They kept repenting. But why was the need for repentance? Disobedience? Depravity. All those are good. The capital theological value, we're going to get it out of this book as we go through it, is depravity. All those are theological values. We're dealing with people that is without God, but they're God's people. See, our humanity is God's people, but some people are without God. And the capital theological value that we're gonna see in this book while we're studying it is the depravity of man.
Which I feel like, I mean, all the doctrines are important, but the reason why we teach it first is, I think, first of all, it highlights the need for humility, right? But it also highlights the need for compassion, because after God saves us, you look at the world and people, they're so judgmental, especially, and I'm talking about even the church. If you realize a person can't help themselves, if you realize that they're without the help of the Father, then you aren't thrown off by behaviors and things like that. You attach it to what it belongs to. They're like that because they're without God. And once you understand that and you keep that doctrine in your mind, I think it helps us to be more effective in our evangelism.
Yes, now, to be sure, there's a mandate from God that goes out to everybody. There was a mandate that went out from God to these people. Whether they was aware of it or not is not the issue, okay? In the book of Ecclesiastes, it says, the whole duty of man, let's go to the Ecclesiastes chapter 12. I don't want to misquote it.
Let's hear the sum of the
Yeah,
Some of the matter.
yeah. Get me there, Omar, get me there.
You ready? You ready?
You there?
Yeah.
Now, listen at this. A lot of people say this is for saved people. This is a declaration from God to anybody who was ever born. Okay, whether you saved or not. And so with the nation Israel, even though Joshua has died off and the other elders has died off, the responsibility to obey is still there, even if they was never told. Okay, so even if a person is never told, what he's going to read applies. Okay, good.
Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Ecclesiastes 12, verse 13.
Wait till everybody get there.
Then I want to go to Judges 2:10.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. You ready? Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandment, for this is man's all.
This is man's all. Whether you know or not, that responsibility lies with every man that has ever been born and ever will be born. Whether he's a Jew, whether he's a Gentile, whether he's part of the church, whether he's not saved, this is the whole duty of man. And it's a commandment from God.
Look
Go
at
ahead.
verse 14 at the same time. When you finish it up, it says, for God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil.
Yes. And you had a Judges
Yeah,
passage.
Judges at chapter 2, verse 10, to go along with the statement you made, Judges 2:10. You ready?
Let me get there. Yeah, I'm gonna pick the pace up with this thing as days go on. Just
No
bear
problem.
with me. Okay,
That's
go ahead.
It says, when all the generation had been gathered to the Father, where Joshua and all the other elders, all the other ones that had pointed from the generation.
You said 2:10?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Judges 2:10. When all the generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord nor the work which he had done for
Mhm.
Israel.
Right, and that was the statement that I had made earlier. All the generations that was with Joshua had died off,
Mhm.
but the responsibility didn't die off.
Mm-mm.
See, man doesn't get an excuse or get a pass. Like they didn't get a pass because they wasn't told. They were still responsible for being obedient to God and living as he wanted them to live. I always tell people, they say, well, what about the poor people in Africa who, first of all, Africa is not poor, but what about the poor soul in Africa who never heard of the Lord? Won't God save them? Ignorance doesn't get you a pass. And so with these people, ignorance of what God demanded of them didn't get them a pass. And so what happens? When they disobeyed, God sent a switch. I think the scripture mentions that in here somewhere.
In the New Testament too as well, that the ignorance will not be in this.
You don't get a pass. It's usually, what about the innocent person over in a foreign country who never heard? Who's innocent?
Verse 14 is what you look at, is chapter 2.
And I think a lot of times with people, when they say stuff like that, I think they misinterpret it that these people are void of knowledge at all.
Even if they void of knowledge at all, there's no pass.
Well, and I say that is this, that void of knowledge is not a void of knowledge.
Yes, now you're getting into Romans chapter 1 now.
yeah,
You're
18.
familiar with it?
Yes.
20.
They're without excuse, okay, and we get that.
I was gonna say the same thing, Romans 1,
Yes, they're without excuse.
you got
Because,
general revelation and you got
right,
special revelation.
even though that revelation is not to bring salvation, it actually brings condemnation,
Mhm.
because with that, you're without excuse, yes.
Well, I was saying, you said there was a statement where he gave them over basically in.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to it.
Go ahead then.
You wanna go ahead?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I'm not telling you, go ahead.
No, you're not there yet.
Okay,
The fact that it's very interesting to me, and this is just something that I was looking at, how you mentioned, Ehud.
that's fine, I got you.
Yeah, Ehud. How his sword was on his left, I mean, his sword was on his right.
Right hand.
But he used his left hand. And it's very neat that throughout the scriptures, the left hand is always bringing destruction.
Yeah,
So it's everything, like I said, when you look at your plate, everything has a morsel in it for somewhere. Let's get that little.
and left-handed people are seen less fortunate in a lot of arenas. That's one of the things I see.
Well,
Huh?
reason,
Yeah,
it occurs.
yeah. But I remember boxing a left-hand man one time. I ain't gonna get into that story.
Well, see, with him,
But left-handed people have some enormous strength, right, Crystal? She,
but like you're talking about, like I said, and that's where he got away with it because they didn't search his right side, because normally what they would look for in a person's coming in, they would search him on their left side, because if they're right-handed, they would go to the left side and hold their sword on the left side.
Mhm,
They never searched him on the right side. That's why he could get his double blade in there. They
right.
never saw it.
So he had it on his coat.
Mhm.
Go ahead, sir. I was gonna say, and they still, even in that thing, when they talked about, him killing King, that's the grand thing that we talk about. But the left hand is a small thing, but even when you look back at Gilgal, well, everything was before he did what he was supposed to do.
Mhm.
Right.
So it's those little things that when you read the stories of the judges, you see that the ones that were called forward still maintain
Right,
that remembrance of what happened. And we're talking a 40 years after.
yeah,
So we got a 40-year time frame, and the memory of some wavered, but the memory of the faithful, the ones that were called upon to pass judgment, not judgment for an individual, but judgment for Israel. They still had that remembrance. Yeah, but
me and Justin was talking about that before you came in. It's the little things sometimes that we think are little, but once we learn them, they're magnified,
Mhm.
.
Go ahead, Eric.
What's in a double-edged sword? Why can't you just say a sword?
That-
We get into that.
Hebrews, it's meaning to it.
Did you have something?
I was just, even today, the scabbard is on your left side.
Mhm.
You're right, but you pull it this way.
Right,
And.
Whether you left or right, it stays
Yeah.
there.
but he went the opposite.
Yeah.
He was on his right side, yeah,
To face somebody like that, not knowing they're left-handed,
right.
you might be fooled.
Yeah, well, but the thing about it is, he was fooled in the sense that he sent his guards out. He wanted a private message for him,
Because he said they had
but
a
he
sticker
wasn't ready
message
for
for
it.
him.
Yeah, he says private. Yeah, you think it's a small thing when you send the guards out, but that
No,
was a
no.
big thing
Mhm.
to the man with the sword,
Mhm.
because he had to do it and get away. Okay, going further. Here's a nation that before Joshua solemnly swore to obey God, quickly, not taking their time, quickly intermarried with pagans
Mm.
and turned to other gods. It's like they could not wait. I see that and I think about a child that just can't wait to graduate from high school and leave. sometimes people can be our restraint, they can be our governing party to slow us down. And so Joshua was that for them. But when they died off, these people did what their hearts always wanted to do. And this is why when we read in the book of Judges, when they fought wars, they say, don't bring nothing back. Because if you bring it back, then you might have it as a trinket or call it a contact with their God. As a matter of fact, not only they quickly turned to other gods, they didn't hold on to the one and true God. So it wasn't like they was worshiping two gods. In some cases they were, which one is no God, but they just said, forget this God, because I can't see him, I can't touch him.
I don't know.
I don't have to beautify him and clean him up. There's no way I can please him because he's distant. Now I have a God from these pagans over here who actually come before and touch and feel and see. They immediately turn from God and start worshiping idols. And this is what happens when you intermarry, in this case. If you marry a pagan who's worshiping another way, then they're going to introduce you to their God, which is no God. The nation Israel was notorious for that. And when we get here, this is something that we'll talk about even with the church. We have specific divine instructions as a church. Not that we can't marry people from other nations, but we're not to marry non-believers. Because the same thing that happened with them as a country can happen to us as individuals or even in a local fellowship. Scripture tells us that the Old Testament was written for example, not just as a person, but as a nation. Morality sink to great depth as sons stole from their mothers. Let's look at 17, Judges 17, 2 and 3. Not only that, a whole tribe condoned on homosexuality and a rape murder. 17, 2 and 3. I'll read it. Let me start at verse 1. Now there was a man of the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah. He said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver which were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse in my hearing, behold, the silver is with me. I took it, stole it. And his mother said, blessed be my son by the Lord. He then, verse 3, he then returned the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother. And his mother said, I wholly dedicate the silver from my hands to the Lord, for my son to make a graven image. See how it just sunk down to just more decay? She got it back, and now she makes a graven image and a molten image. Now, therefore, I will return them to you. This is what happens. More decay. Doing things of a figment of their own imagination. Let's go to chapter 19, verse 22 and 30. Can I get a reader for that? 22 to 30. Just listen to that.
22 through 30?
Just 22 through 30. We did, this is the second one I told you how to just condone homosexuality. Go ahead.
While they were celebrating, behold, the men of the city, certain worthless fellows, surrounded the house, pounding on the door, and they spoke to the owner of the house and the old man, saying, bring out the man who came into your house, that we may have relations with him.
They really want to be a cousin, huh? Go ahead.
Then the man, the owner of the house, went out to them and said to them, no, my fellows, please do not act so wickedly. Since this man has come into my house, do not commit this act of folly. Here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. Please let me bring them out, that he may ravish them and do to them whatever you wish. But do not commit such an act of folly against this man. But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and brought her out to them, and they raped her and abused her all night until morning. Then let her go to at the approach of dawn. As the day began to dawn, the woman came and fell down at the doorway of the man's house where her master was until full daylight. When her master rose in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way, then behold, his concubine was lying at the doorway of the house with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up and let us go." But there was no answer. And he placed her on the donkey, and the man arose and went to his home. When he entered his house, he took a knife and laid hold of his concubine and cut her in 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout the territory of Israel. All who saw it said, "Nothing like this has ever happened or been seen from the day when the sons of Israel came up from the land of Egypt to this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak up."
Mordecai. Men looking for men. This is not just something that just happened and that Paul talks about in Romans. This is nothing new. It's just being manifested more of the desires of the man apart from God's heart. So we see in this book, Israel's sins made God angry. So he turned them over to their enemies. That's what was happening. These enemies weren't just coming up on them. These enemies were sent to them by God. Somebody said a couple of Sundays ago that even the evil man's heart is in the hand of God. He controls by providence everything that happens, especially everything that happens to his people. It was Sunday said about Job. You know, Satan was asked, "Have you tried my servant Job?" As they were God's people, we're God's people. Nothing happened to Israel that God didn't allow by his providence. God did not actually have to be called up on as he was unaware what was going on and had to come to the rescue. A lot of times he caused it and waited for them to cry out that he may come and rescue them. Question? Okay. This is the nation that broke the covenant, that felt the wrath of a righteous God. Every time they lapsed into sin, judgment followed. Let's go to Judges 3:12 through 14. Not only God sent their enemies to them, God strengthened their enemies to come to them. In other words, God set it up to where they would lose the fight. Because if God sends an enemy to you and you that enemy, then you actually conquer God. So if God sends you to your enemy, Israel, and that enemy conquers you, then actually they conquered your God. Now I'm saying if you're going clean, not like with Achan stole something. 3:12 through 14.
And the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord strengthened Eglon,
Got it?
king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. Then he gathered to himself the people of Ammon and Amalek, and went and defeated Israel, and took possession of the city of Psalms. So the children of Israel served Eglon, king of Moab, 18 years.
You know, you have people out sometimes having a bad day and they say, "Lord, why me?" And when I hear it sometimes, I say, "Why not you? You know, what makes you so special? Why not you?" I imagine they were saying, "Lord, why us?" But the scripture says the Lord strengthened those people in a way that they was fighting against God that they didn't even know. All they saw was people. Yes.
You know, sometimes hindsight, really, sometimes in hindsight, you know, reading scriptures, we would kind of not question what they're going through and justify it going forward. But you can justify it just in, we're at 3, you go to 2, one more chapter over, and even a half a chapter, and a chapter and a half, you get right back to Joshua, when Joshua was dying.
Right.
And he told them that these things would happen. So when we see them transitioning into following other gods, Joshua warned them not to do that. Remember when I was teaching, it said the good and the bad. They wanted the good. They had the land. They wanted the good. They forgot all about the bad.
Right.
And every time they forgot about the bad, God solidified his promise. It was given to the Joshua. So it's almost, you know, when some people understand it, we have hindsight and they want to go further forward. When you really just gotta go backwards and say,
Right.
you're reaping what God told you were gonna get
Right.
from the beginning.
And what you said, now, remember when Joshua and the generation died off, these people were still in the land and they was enjoying the land. They was, I mean, years went by, there was no trouble. They was enjoying the land, but that lackadaisia passed by and hey, these people over here, let's go and be with them and let's marry them and let's do this and let's have fun. They're okay. Joshua said, get rid of them. They didn't get rid of them. They became neighbors and they intermingled within tribes, and they actually became family. So when they fought some of these families, they was actually fighting against. When they fought some of these people, they was actually fighting against cousins, mother-in-laws, fathers-in-laws. You know, we'll see a big glimpse of this when we get to the book of Nehemiah, when they married the women from Babylonian and the Babylonian captivity was over. And they married Babylonian women. You know, these were the people, very people God told you not to marry. But he had to send them back. So in this case, they didn't send them back. And so there was trouble after trouble after trouble after trouble. So it wasn't going away because you had the very people who was your enemy, now they're your kinfolks.
Same thing with Solomon.
Yeah.
Like this, but you mentioned something when you asked about what doctrine you see. You see the constant thing. It's a depraved people
It's just dripping from it.
who get to a point in their belief that they're okay and lose sight of the message.
Yes.
And it's the same thing going forward as we hear the gospel. The gospel is given to depraved people who hear this message, and now we're going forward and we're watching the same thing continuously happen. So,
and I'm gonna put this out on the table, and it's gonna sting all of us. We were just as bad. Yeah. We were equally depraved as these people. God give us no pass, no advantage because we was not Jews. We were equally from Adam under the same condemnation. It's just that our sin may be in a different dispensation. It's just like they gets no pass, I had no excuse, neither do we. And so now when we see how depravity just drips from this story, it drips from our story as well. And when we understand that doctrine, now we really understand grace. Apart from understanding the depth of depravity in any dispensation, you can't understand grace. Grace is just a word we use. You know, they thought they understood grace and mercy when God saved them from these social wars. But what they needed was salvation. Good point. Over and over, the suffering of the people led to repentance and a cry for mercy, and God's gracious response demonstrated his love and his patience. Remember, these were his people. Israel was his own people. He never abandoned them. Even though they thought when they was doing what they was doing, God was distant and far off. You know, when they cried out to God, they maybe have thought that God was just being informed of what was going on. So he had to come running, like somebody told a story. Just as a mother hear her child hurt herself and cry, she would run to see what's wrong. No, God already knows what's wrong before we even cry. He knew what was wrong. Remember, he sent the switch, you know, and they cried out. When they prayed earnestly, he sent someone to rescue them. These are the judges that he raised up in Israel, just as he did when they cried out in Egypt. He sent Moses to deliver them. You go through the book of Judges and you'll see the following. I'm gonna sum it up. The success and the failures of the tribes in Canaan. Successes and failure, we see it all the way through. There's success in war, they're lap back in the sin, there's failures. You'll always see the rule of the judges. That's what this book is about. The line of judges terminated with Samson, and with his death, the office of judges was carried to the grave. There was no more judges after that. From there, of course, we get to the book of Ruth, but we come along in the book of Samuel, and we move to the kings. So once we leave Judges, there's gonna be no more judges. And I hope that in this introduction, that it will stimulate all of our hearts to go back and take a serious look at this book. You know, it's a picture of the depravity of man, even in the face of God. Amen. Any questions, any comments?